Hi, well, I'm Natalie Chapuan. I'm an undergrad at UChicago studying astrophysics and English. And with me, I have Dr. Sara Simon. Sarah, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Sara Simon. I'm a Wilson Fellow at Fermilab, and I work primarily on CMB-S4, but also on several precursor CMB experiments as well.
Awesome. So could you kind of give me a quick summary of your current research, what you're working on right now?
Yeah, so I work a lot on the instrument side, so building the telescopes that are going to observe this first light from the universe. And so I build one of the key components and design some of the key components that couple light onto our detectors, making sure that we get every photon we can. And then I also work a lot on simulating our instrument so we can understand it better and get to these new levels of sensitivity where things like systematics will really start to matter a lot more. So trying to understand our instrument and all of the uncertainties associated with it.
Cool. So what would you say is the most difficult aspect of your work right now?
I think it's right now it's hard to work remotely a lot of the time. We're used to working really close to labs, so you can just pop in, do some lab work, and then go back to your desk. But right now, you have to work remotely for most of the time, and then only go into the lab when you really need to. And so that makes it a little bit tricky to work on instrumentation.
Yeah, as an instrumentalist, especially, like how do you work around that? You just plan really well, or
Yeah, you pretty much have to plan really well. I've been planning like certain days where I have gaps in all the meetings so I can run to the lab and get stuff done on those days if I need to.
Mhm. Yeah. So what would you say is the most rewarding part of your work? What's your favorite thing?
What I really like is that we're just pursuing the most fundamental questions in the universe, like what's our universe made of? How did it form? How did it evolve? I just find the science itself really exciting because it's answering some of the biggest questions we have about the universe's origins and existence.
What what surprises you about this work? Expect going in.
um, but early on, I thought going in, oh, the more you know, like you become more and more of an expert. But really, what the way that science really works is the more you know, the more you realize you don't understand, and so you're constantly being surprised by things you didn't even think of, or you dig down deep into something and realize, oh, we don't actually really understand everything about it. So I think it's one of the surprising things, but it makes it fun because it never gets boring.
Always something new to do, something new to learn. So,
Exactly.
yeah. And another challenge.
Yeah.
What would you say are like the skills or the tools that are most important to your work? Like, what do you think is a really important ability to have for anyone interested in this?
Yeah. So I think, problem solving abilities, being willing to be wrong. Because a lot of times you try something, it doesn't work. It's not very, the typical view you see of science is like, oh, hypothesis, I test hypothesis, and then then we're done. But really, it's a lot messier than that. There's a lot of failure to get to that one success. And so I think being able to be tenacious and keep going at it and attack a problem from many different angles is one of the most important skills.
Yeah, no, definitely. Good skill in life too. Um,
Yeah, and I think another kind of unexpected skill is like communication skills, because the collaborations we're working in now have a lot of people, like over 200 people, and so all of us are working together toward the same goal. But you have to know how to communicate your ideas, share your ideas, and really benefit from having all these minds combined. And so that's one of the skills you really have nowadays.
yeah. Can you tell me what it's like working in such a massive collaboration? I mean, 200 plus people all sharing research all at once be kind of overwhelming.
Yeah, so the way that it's organized, we usually break out into smaller groups focused on one thing, and then there's interfaces between those groups, and so sometimes you'll talk to another group who has an interface. For example, I work in the modules group designing the detector modules, and so we have a lot of meetings. There's only like maybe 10 people max who work on that. So we all have a small meeting where you're interacting with people, but then there's some bigger venues where we'll go and share our work and get feedback. For example, we have interfaces with the small aperture telescopes, and so the modules have to go in the telescopes. So then we talk about that. So it's not necessarily like there's always 200 people trying to get a word in edgewise. You work in smaller groups, and then you kind of go outwards in groups once you have some more finalized work or need to talk about interfaces.
Very cool. Can you tell me more about like what it's like working as an instrumentalist specifically? Like what does a normal day at work look like for you?
Yeah, so like a normal day is usually, there's a couple of calls to coordinate with people because we're all spread out geographically. But also you're usually spending quite a bit of time in the lab. It depends on what stage of the project you're in. Early on in the project, there's a lot of modeling and less actual hardware. So you would model how the hardware might work using tools and simulations. Then you might prototype things, make small versions of things to make sure that things work before you make 500 of them. And then you really, as it progresses, there's a lot more time in the lab doing the work, making sure everything's coming together. And then once it's fielded for data, you have a lot of knowledge about the instrument that you can actually use to help analyze the data. And that's kind of like how a project goes through, but usually there's several different projects that you're working on. There's usually one where you're doing a little bit of data analysis. There's one that's kind of almost ready to field that you're doing some production on. And then there's always this future one like CMB-S4, where you're starting to do some of the conceptual design and planning. And so you kind of do a little bit of each of those each day.
Multitasking.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have like a favorite memory or experience with your research? Like something that stands out to you?
Yeah, I think one of my favorite things was in graduate school, I worked on this little project called the Atacama B-mode search. There weren't really many people working on it, but we were all very close knit. And I actually, spent quite a bit of time down in Chile at the site working on the telescope. And it's really different to be like, oh, I'm up here and I'm working on a telescope and it'll get fielded. But there's something different about working on it like in the field, making sure it's working, getting to see it actually do observations. It's like all of your work kind of follows through to the final thing there. So that I found really exciting.
Can you tell me more about what that was like? I mean, I know you're up very, very high on the mountain. Like what was everyday life like there?
Yeah, so the site itself is like 17,100 feet, so really high. And so there's not enough oxygen up there for you to really sleep up there safely. And so really we kind of set up camp in the town nearby, at least in Chile. And that town is at about 9,000 feet. So usually you'll wake up in the morning, eat breakfast, drive up this slow road all the way to the top of the mountain. About an hour later, you'll be there at 17,100 feet, get some oxygen if you need it. And then you kind of just, it depends on what you're doing that day. Sometimes you're doing regular maintenance to make sure that they don't break down. Sometimes the telescopes have broken down, so you're frantically trying to fix them. There's also little calibrations that we have to do to make sure that the instrument is working in the way that we think it is. And so you're kind of checking on the health of the instrument and making sure it's doing things. And you can also be sometimes be scheduling what observation it's going to take. Because we have kind of nominal observations, but sometimes you might want to observe a planet, for example, for a calibration. And so you might stop the regular cadence of your observations to look at Jupiter because it's not up all of the time. And so kind of just monitoring all of that.
Very cool. Yeah. 17,000 feet. I think I would just pass out.
That's what the oxygen is for. The first time I was up there, I hadn't taken the oxygen yet, and I was looking for my glove for a very long time before I realized it was on my hand. So it is good to have the oxygen and be safe up there. And then I think another really cool thing about working up there, it's a challenge, but it's kind of fun, is that, you don't have like a whole, like in the lab, you have all these extra supplies and this, but you kind of have to do with the supplies that you have there. So you kind of have to be really inventive about fixing things sometimes. And that can be fun.
Duct tape. That's all I know how to do.
Yeah, there was a lot of duct tape involved.
Yeah. Awesome. So I was just wondering if this was kind of what you pictured for yourself when you were growing up. What did you want to be?
So I went through a few stages. So both of my parents were aerospace engineers. And so I was like, space, of course. But I thought if you liked science and math, you had to be an engineer. And they would always complain about their jobs as parents do. So I was like, oh man, that doesn't sound like too fun. But my eighth grade teacher actually sat me down and said, you can actually just be a scientist, right? And I was like, oh, that sounds so much more fun because you're getting more at the fundamental questions. And so at that point, I knew I wanted to be a scientist, but I didn't really know what type. And so when I got to, that was middle school. So when I got to high school, I just tried out all the science classes that they had. And I really liked physics because it was getting at the most fundamental problems, and it was like really challenging, which I enjoyed. So I decided to major in astrophysics in college, and then I added physics on. So I did an astrophysics and a physics degree. But even then, I didn't know what type of field I wanted to work in. And so as an undergrad, I tried out a couple of different types of research, and then once I found CMB, it was all done. I was like, I want to stay in this, and I have for about 12 years now. So,
what drew you to CMB research in particular?
I think part of it was the people. They were all very welcoming, and like the lab I was in had a really great culture where the grad student and postdoc were really supportive, and as was the professor. But then on top of that, it's really going after the most exciting questions to me, because I was always part physics, part astro, and so it's a really good combination of those, because it's looking at the first light from the universe and asking, what can we learn from that snapshot of the early universe, and how can we use that like as a backlight to all the formation of structure in our universe, and you can learn just so much about the universe with this one thing. And so once I got into it a little bit, I was hooked.
That's amazing. So what advice would you give students who are interested in this field?
Yeah, I would say, try and try out a couple different types of science. If you're kind of K-12, find a science that you kind of like, and then if you're going to college, try out a few different types of research, because you may not really find what you're looking for until you've tried out a couple of different types. And I would just say, it's really challenging, and it's expected to be challenging. So just keep trying. A lot of science is not like, oh, I did a thing and I did well, and that's the end of it. You fail a lot, and you should not feel bad if you're failing a lot by trying science, because it can be challenging, but super rewarding after all of those times of stumbling and getting stuck to finally find the answer.
Very, very cool. So outside of research and your academic life, what do you like to do?
I really love to bake, and I also like gardening and photography. But recently, I've been doing just a ton of baking. I totally nerd out about it and like break things down into spreadsheets and play with recipes and develop my own recipes until I am satisfied with them. So it's been really fun.
Do you watch the Great British Bake Off?
Absolutely.
Oh, the best. It's my comfort TV show.
Yeah, I just wish there was more.
I know. All right, I think those are just about all of the questions that I have. Is there anything else you'd like to talk about that we missed?
Well, I just want to also bring up that when you're going into science, it's really important to find mentors. And you don't need just one mentor. It's good to have a lot of different mentors that you can get different things for. So if you are wanting to go into this field, look for the people that will help you and help you bring you on the way, whether that's through support, through helping you find job connections. Make sure you find the people that want to support you and see you go forward.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yep.